Hi, Sabri here. It's been a while since I recorded my last video. But here we go, we're continuing on with Robert A. Johnson's book, Inner Work. And we're on step 2, which is entitled The Dialogue. Let's get started. You have invited the unconscious. The images have risen up into your imagination. Now you are ready to begin the dialogue. Making a dialogue is mostly a matter of giving yourself over to the imagination and letting it flow. There are various principles we can follow, but moving the experience ahead consists more than anything else in letting the inner figures have a life of their own. So remember, he's talking about the active imagination here. We went over the differences between the dream work, where we actually were focusing in the first part on dream work and all of those steps that you would take, writing it down, identifying the symbols of the dream, then going over the interpretations of what they mean to you, those symbols, and going over all the details, the places and events and all those things. Now we're in part 2, which we're talking about active imagination. So here's where you go into a deliberate space where you're analyzing something that you want to work through. It could be a fantasy, something like that. Not an erotic fantasy. It just means fantasy as far as something that you daydream about. You get lost in thought about, and it's something, bringing that subconscious thing that keeps triggering the thoughts that keep recurring, following them through to completion and seeing kind of what they mean, what the message is there. And so you could do that with dreams. That say you have a dream and you wake up suddenly and you just kind of at a loss for words what that meant. You could do active imagination and pick up where you left off. And right now what it's getting into in step 2 is the dialogue, how you get that conversation going. And right here it says the most important thing is letting the inner figures have a life of their own. It's not meant for you to control or force or push the dialogue in any certain way. So let's learn more about that. As a practical matter, you say or do whatever comes into your mind that feels appropriate and ethical. If a figure appears in the imagination and seems to have nothing to say at first, one may get the conversation going by asking who he or she is. You want to identify that figure in your imagination. So if someone comes up and it's like someone that's, say an old man pops into your head, don't just dismiss that and say, oh, that has nothing to do, I don't have any basis for that. That's what the whole thing is. It's exploring what comes up. Anything could possibly come up, and that would symbolize, say, a person or a personification of something within you. So maybe inside of your joints you feel old, and then it's like the subconscious is gonna, so you start this inner dialogue and you start to talk to this old man. He starts to talk to you about how it doesn't feel like you are active enough, or you stretch or move around enough, and it's like, okay, so my subconscious is telling me that I need to get my joints more lubricated, I need to work out, or whatever the case may be. And so that's what it's saying. Once someone pops up or something, start the dialogue by asking questions. And the easiest question to start is who he or she is, if a figure, a person comes up. Ask what the person wants, what the person would like to talk about, would like to do. It is better to ask questions than to lecture or start making pronouncements, because the basic attitude you want to show is a willingness to learn, and that's emphasized. If an inner figure does something, write it down. Then do or say whatever your reaction is in response. Often an inner person will try to draw you into some activity, take you somewhere, lead you off on a path or a journey. And if it seems right to you, then do it. And, sorry, I lost my place. And follow the person. Oh, no. Let me read that over because I lost my place. If it seems right to you, then do it and follow the person. Or you don't like the activity. Oh my gosh, my bad. I'm kind of tired right now. It's after work. But I've got to keep going. I'm going to try and get back in the hang of this because I got to make the time. You got to make the time for what you think is important and what you want to do. Growing and learning and sharing That's what I'm getting committed. So let me read that over for you 1 second. If it seems right to you, then do it, and record what happens along the way. If you feel that it is wrong to follow the person, or you don't like the activity or involvement that the other inner person suggests, you have a right to say so. You have the right to refuse and to state your reasons. That in turn will often lead to a heated discussion of the conflict between this inner person and what you think you want, or don't approve of, or are afraid of. All this is excellent material for the active imagination. The dialogue has begun, and the different parts of the self are learning from each other. If you find that an inner character will not speak, it is legitimate to prime the pump. You can initiate an exchange just as you might if you were stuck with a guest who was shy and uncommunicative. Ask questions, express your feelings. If you're afraid of the person who has come up, say so. If the person reminds you of an experience you had, or a dream, or someone in the outer world that you know, tell the person about it. Probably nothing gets the dialogue going as quickly or on as deep a level as does an expression of feelings. When you let your feelings out and invite your inner person to do the same, it usually constellates the exchange very differently. This is because feelings are mostly concerned with values, who or what we love and appreciate, what we are afraid of, what we feel is dishonest or illegitimate, what we desire for ourselves and for others. And values, we find, are the mainsprings of our human lives. It is extremely important to write down everything as it happens and everything that is said. Writing protects you from wandering off into passive fantasies that creep in from the edges of the mind. It helps you to concentrate more and experience more deeply. The physical writing etches the experience more vividly in the conscious mind. Conversing with one image. In order to do a true active imagination, it is necessary to stick with the image that we start with. Stay with the situation until there is some kind of resolution. Once one has encountered a particular image or started a dialogue with it, it is important to continue from there and not to allow oneself to be distracted by other images or fantasy material that may jump into the mind and compete with the active imagination. If you allow your mind to flit from image to image and situation to situation, you will only put yourself through a meaningless series of starts and stops, none of which will lead anywhere. If your ego is genuinely going to the inner figures and interacting with them, then there will be continuous, coherent experience. Excuse me. So sorry. Let me read that over. If your ego is genuinely going to the inner figures and interacting with them, then there will be a continuous, coherent experience with the original figures. Don't sit passively while your mind flits from one image to another, from one film clip to another. This is about discipline. It's about focusing the mind. It's about sitting there, sitting with yourself. It's almost like meditation. Meditation, you have to learn to clear your mind and to stick and focus on one thing. Now, a lot of people get hung up and they get to the point where they don't like to meditate because they think, I have too many thoughts. That's the point. We all have lots of thoughts. But how we're living, we're letting the mind control the man, and the man controls the mind. The mind is a tool. We don't have to think constantly. That's one of the biggest things I've learned recently, is that you don't need to think constantly. You should be clear. You should be present in the moment, not thinking about something else, past, present, past or future. Present is where you are, and if you're in the moment, you're usually experiencing. And depending on what position you're in, first position, you're thinking about yourself while you're talking to someone, that's still not being present. You still need to be aware. So you're like thinking, how am I behaving? Am I representing myself as my highest self? That's fine, but still you don't want to be gone off in the abyss. You need to be present. So just as meditation, this is something, it's a discipline. It's a training yourself to stay focused on the path to get to the uncovering of what is there in the subconscious. Active imagination is a complete experience, one that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Like a dream, it usually produces a statement of a problem, a period of interaction with the problem, and the different viewpoints on the subject, and finally a resolution of the conflict or the issue. This may take place in one session, or it may require a series of sessions that continue for days or even years. You can get a perspective on this by remembering the examples we've already given. The first was the dialogue between a woman and her inner Japanese artist. In that dialogue, one can easily identify the point where the problem was raised right at the beginning. There followed a long conversation in which the alternatives were spelled out that might be solutions to the problem. Finally, at the end of the dialogue, there was a resolution. This was not the last conversation with the Japanese artist, but already within this one session, we find a resolution of the basic issue, follow through to completion. By contrast, consider the example of the man who was led off on his mystical journey to help the queen who was in distress. In this session of active imagination, the problem has been stated. There are evil forces at work in the land, people being hurt. All this is being blamed on the innocent queen. As the man sets off on his journey with his guide, he does what he can to begin to heal the land by healing the little girl. But his adventure has only begun. There is more work to do. In fact, this particular act of imagination has gone on for years and still continues. Participating with your feelings. Full participation is the essence of active imagination. All the things we have said about the distinction between active imagination and passive fantasy are particularly important at this stage. It's vital to join in as a complete partner in the exchange. One may make suggestions, initiate, ask questions, argue, object, everything one would do in any exchange between equals. The most important aspect of this is to be present in your feelings and participate with your feelings. One must sense that it is real, that it is actually happening, even though it is just inside rather than outside. If you are detached from it, and this is the warning, if you are detached from it or just feel that it is nothing but a fantasy you're watching from a safe distance, there's no real experience. So it's kind of like a waste of time. If you do this, you commit and you go with it. It might feel silly at first, it's not something normal, but it's just, you have to go with it to see what you can get from it. The idea here is to get to know yourself better, clean up the stuff that's going on so you can become more whole and balanced and progress in life. So a lot of these things, these are subconscious blocks. If you bring those things to the surface, you can help to integrate yourself and to move drastically forward. This is the stuff that we constantly ignore. So this is the time when you sit down to actually address it. Be present with it. Understand the importance of being present with it. Because otherwise, why sit down and start? It's go all the way. I think that's what he's saying. If one is not really participating with the feeling side, it is not true active imagination. A good example of being present in your feelings is the woman in the example who dreamed that two male figures who resembled her husband and her brother were ignoring her. What kind of feelings did she have when she went to them in active imagination? She was furious, she was hurt, she was indignant, and she actually felt all of that. Her feelings and her emotions were there in the exchange with these two inner persons, and it was her feelings finally that they responded to. One can usually tell whether a person is doing a real active imagination by the feeling responses that come out. If the normal human reaction to the situation in the imagination would be anger, fear, or intense joy, but none of these feelings are present, then I know the person is detached from the proceedings, just watching from a distance, not really participating, and not taking it seriously. We must participate completely. There is, however, one line that should not be crossed. We must not stray from the zone of participation into the zone of control. In active imagination, we cannot exert control over the inner persons or over what is happening. We have to let the imagination flow where it will, let the experience develop without trying to determine in advance what is going to happen, what is going to be said, and what is going to be done. Sometimes it's hard to see the difference between fully participating and trying to control. You can draw a good analogy from your dialogues with external people. When you're in a conversation with someone, courtesy and respect lead you to give the other person equal time. We try not to dominate the conversation. We don't flood the other person with a stream of opinions so as to cut off his or her chance to express a viewpoint. The same rules of courtesy, restraint, and respect apply when we dialogue with the citizens of the inner world. Sometimes what your inner person is saying sounds stupid, primitive, or nonsensical, or it rubs you so completely against the grain that you get angry. Still, you must let it be said. Try dropping control for once. Stop trying to make the inner figures sound intelligent or sensible according to your ego's standards, and let them be whoever or whatever they are. Because remember, these are aspects of you, parts of you that have been suppressed, have been submerged, have been ignored. And the last thing you want to do is do more damage to that while in the active imagination. When you're there and you're imagining it, you're allowing yourself to be who you are, the parts of you that you aren't even really sure of. So allowing the characters in the active imagination to be who they are is the same as letting yourself be who you are. Learning more about yourself, how to understand better that part of yourself, and then just integrate it. So then you don't have to be in this battle between it. Who am I? How should I be? What was I doing when I lashed out at that person because I had this deep, I have this trigger that I didn't know about. We're working through that stuff. So allow them to be who they are and what they are. To give up control means to relinquish your preconceptions about what should happen, what should be said, what messages or meaning ought to come out of all of this. In fact, you should not be thinking about what it means at all at this stage, because that would lead you into trying to stage manage the experience to come out with the right messages. We need to forbear imposing the ego's expectations on the proceedings. We need to give up the ought to mentality and instead let flow what is. The feelings, conflicts, and personalities that truly live in us below the surface. Learning to listen. Active imagination is more than anything a process of listening. Not all dialogue or interaction with your inner persons will be through words. There are sessions of active imagination in which the entire experience takes place through actions, through seeing and doing. It is still a dialogue, but a dialogue without words. More often than not, however, there will be a spoken dialogue. In either case, we have to learn to listen. Often we have only experienced these parts of ourselves who now come up as images in our imagination as enemies, as carriers of slothful resistance, neurosis, unproductive vices, immaturity. This is how they look to the ego. Again, these are aspects of us that we might not have known are there, or we may have suppressed over the years, but are still very much a part of us. But now, if we are going to set up an exchange in place of the habitual lifelong war we have fought, we have to begin to listen. After so many years of ignoring these parts of ourselves, seeing them as the inferior characteristics in our personalities, we find that they have some very unpleasant things to tell us when we finally listen. It is no surprise that some inner person tells me what a tyrant I've been over the years, how I have shoved my ego's attitudes down the throat of the unconscious. One must be willing to say, "Who are you? What do you have to say? I will listen to you. You have the floor for this entire hour if you want. You may use any language you want. I am here to listen." This requires a formidable realignment of attitude for most of us. If there is something in yourself that you see as a weakness, a defect, a terrible obstruction to a productive life, you nevertheless have to stop approaching that part of yourself as the bad guy. For once during active imagination, you must try to listen to that inferior being as though he or she were the voice of wisdom. If our depressions or weaknesses come to us in personified form, we need to honor those characteristics as part of the total self. It is awesome and frightening to take your sense of inferiority, guilt, or remorse, put that part of you in the witness box and say, "You have every privilege. You are the one who bears witness to that which I neither know nor understand. You may say whatever you wish, at whatever length. You will be respected and honored, and what you say will be recorded. But it is from this that the true power of active imagination rises. We learn to listen to the ones whom we have kept mute. We learn to honor those whom we have dishonored." Man, that's awesome. I'm going to keep going. I think I have a little bit of battery, so hopefully I can get this before it cuts off. The next session is called